So just a very quick introduction. Vipul is from the Suzuki Innovation Center in India. He's going to talk a little bit about what Suzuki is doing in innovation and sustainability in India. We'll then hand over to the panel led by Marsha. And we had some questions earlier about funding. It's a wonderful lineup because Matt is from the Lawrence Livermore National Labs and has the responsibility of helping high-risk technologies get funded. So if you have something, he's got Uncle Sam behind. And right after that, when you've got past that technology gap and you want to start building a company, you need to talk to Wade at Plug and Play and the corporates, partnerships, and everything else. So this is where you figure out how to build your capital stack and how to design it. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Vipul.
Well, thanks, Rishi, for putting me up after Stanford professor. I'm not sure what I can add, but let me just be very quick and then we can jump into the panel. I'm sure we all want to listen to them. IIT doesn't help in front of Stanford sometimes, you know. How many of you have seen a Suzuki car? Does Suzuki, oh, okay, quite a few. So a brief intro about Suzuki. We are the 10th largest automaker in the world. We are there in 200 countries, and we make 650 cars every day, and we sell them. That's a huge carbon footprint per day. This is not a number which excites me. It's a number which sort of concerns me, right? So since Arvind was talking about radical innovation, so I thought I'll give some examples of radical innovations which at Suzuki Innovation Center we're trying to do to compensate for this carbon footprint we are making on the world. So as Manu said, we are there in India. The first center of Suzuki we thought should be in India because we believe India is going to play a pivotal role in the global, acceptance of sustainable technologies and etc. Because at least for automotive industry, it's the fastest growing market, and we thought it's reasonable to put our first innovation center in India. So one of the projects which we have recently kicked off is to, of course, EV is something we are trying out, but we believe EV may not be the only solution for countries like India because 90% of the electricity that comes in India is non-renewable, unlike European market, which is like 60% or 50%. So what we thought was, so India has the highest number of highest biomass in the world. I mean, the cattle have the highest, 4 times more than US. So what we did was we partnered with National Dairy Foundation of India, which collects milk from different small villages. And we told them, don't just collect milk. Why don't we also collect the cow dungs? And can we create a distributed grid of biomass electric grids that can produce alternate sorts of fuels for the cars, example CNGs, etc. So we have kicked off that pilot recently and trying that. One of the other examples is, for example, what we found out when we were scouting for ideas in India was, India has the highest production of banana. We all love bananas, but do we know that once a banana is produced, we have to cut off the tree. It's not, the tree doesn't grow again. We have to cut it off, and the farmers burn it. So when you burn that, there's a huge CO2 emission that happens and carbon monoxide emission that happens. And there was a guy in one of the villages in Gujarat. What he was doing was, he thought, this is a huge waste. Why don't we reuse these banana trunks and convert it into fiber? And from last 10 years, he's trying to do it. And at this point, he's able to make thin fiber sheets out of that banana trunks and even sell it to African countries right now. So what we are working with him is to scale him up, and can we make packaging materials, because a lot of automotive parts need packaging. Right now we use plastic. So this is another radical innovation example. We're trying it out at Innovation Center, right? So as Arvind rightly said, radical innovation is what is needed, especially in developing countries like India, African countries. And yeah, so this is where Suzuki Innovation Center is playing a role. And if anyone is interested, especially focused on India, we are more than happy to collaborate, connect, and talk. So now I think we can jump onto the panel. And
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Vipul, you're going to join us, right, on the panel? Okay, great. I have to say, Manu, when you called me and said, would I do this panel, I had no idea what I was in for. I mean, we are definitely on the leading edge, and we are definitely ahead of Sand Hill Road with many of these ideas. I mean, who would think a new fuel out of the molecules that come out of our body and that we breathe out? I mean, think about it. And think about the message from the two gentlemen who were up here first, Poe and Gupta. Arvind Gupta. I mean, the idea of you as entrepreneurs having to think really out of the box, being aware the whole time of what your destination is really, you know, a little sobering if you think about it. Well, like Manu said, we've got 3 panelists here who are going to talk a little bit more at the granular level about things that you can do to really actualize those ideas and get them from idea to innovation to actually company and maybe even exit. And we've got 3 really terrific panelists with us. But before I mention them by name, I wanted to just ask you as an audience to keep the following in mind, because you'll hear this being talked about at least around the edges, if not directly. First, there's no silver bullet to solving climate change. There's no single solution. I think Professor Yermillo really underscored that, as the other 2 did as well. Solutions today are very complex, and so is the financing. I mean, we're not talking about a single check from a single VC or a set of VCs. We're talking about a capital stack, and what goes into that capital stack can be complex. We're talking about scale being the holy grail. We're not going to get there unless we've got scale. And that scale is achievable only if you, as the entrepreneur, can show investors that you are doing what you can to de-risk their investment. So it's on your shoulders, really, but the benefits and the results can be tremendous, both for the planet and for your pocketbooks. So here we have Matt Garrett, first to my left. And Matt, as Manu said, is from DOE. He's the Director of Innovation and Partnerships at the Lawrence Livermore Lab, one of the important 16 DOE labs. Before that, he was the Chief Technology Officer at Slack on Stanford campus. And his work is to make sure $1.5 billion gets into the right places across the country. To his left is Wade, Wade, I'm looking around here, Wade Bitaraf, the founding director of energy and sustainability with Plug and Play in Silicon Valley. In 2021, they invested in some 210 startups. And over the lifetime of the company, of Plug and Play, they've had 123 exits, a very formidable record. And next to him is a new addition to the panel. So Vipul, we'll have to let you do the little introduction of yourself, if you would, at the beginning. But he brings a very important dimension to our panel, and that is what Suzuki is doing in India. An article I read in Live Mint a couple of days ago underscored what they're trying to do to raise the bar for Suzuki vehicles, a very tough competitor in the India market. And when I read that, and when I listened to Arvind Gupta and Poe this morning, or earlier today, it made me think that a lot of what is happening in this world of new investment has to do with sustainability, but also competition and competitiveness. And maybe you'll address a little bit of that, what you're doing technology-wise in India. But we'll start with you, Matt. If you would give us just a sort of down and dirty on what you're about in terms of DOE and what it means to this audience of entrepreneurs.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank TiEcon for the invitation, Manu, my good friend. My role at Lawrence Livermore National Lab and prior at SLAC and at Oak Ridge National Lab is to engage with small businesses, entrepreneurs, investors, large companies that want to take some of the ideas that were developed at the national labs to the market. And as you can imagine, over the last 2 to 5 years, especially, given the emphasis on getting climate tech to market, the national labs, there's a lot of interest in what we're doing. I've spent a long time doing that from both the licensing standpoint, where we take ideas that are a certain point, work with companies to take them, legally to market, or even work alongside companies to develop ideas, or in some cases, help them solve their problems that preventing them from taking ideas to the market. And so most of that's been in sort of a concept, prototype, experimental stage. What we're seeing from the Department of Energy overall is that they're doing something that's been unprecedented over the last 2 years. They've actually started thinking about how do clean tech and climate tech technologies actually get adopted by the marketplace. Typically, you'll see, and everybody's seen NSF, universities, they'll get an idea, they'll get it funded, they'll develop it to a certain point, and then you reach that lovely phrase that we call the valley of death. And there it sits, and waiting to somehow bridge that valley through funding or otherwise to get to the market. And so that's happened time and time and again. Well, the Department of Energy 2 years ago, under the bipartisan infrastructure law, started a new office called the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations to actually bridge that gap and help de-risk getting technologies to the marketplace. Over the next 3 years, they're going to be investing $20 billion in clean energy demonstrations across the country. I guess the first 4 topic areas are grid-related technologies, hydrogen, carbon capture, and long-duration energy storage. So imagine like an uninterruptible power supply for various facilities. So that's unprecedented. That's going to be, the idea there is that the government wants to invest and de-risk the investment from the private sector and investors such as yourselves on demonstrating things at scale. And when we're talking at scale, we're not talking about something on a large benchtop. We're talking about something being deployed in a major metropolitan area, for example. Deploying long-duration energy storage modules in part of a city to help backup supplies for large facilities like power plants, grids, schools, universities, whatnot. So these are real things that hopefully the idea is that when these things are demonstrated, there will be successful demonstrations. And then from there, you essentially have a roadmap or a product that can now be proliferated across the United States. So it's very exciting. We're having a lot of engagement with companies that are trying to do that with some lab-related technology and other technologies that are in the marketplace right now. And so with the addition of that and having the Loan Programs Office, now you have the Department of Energy is now funding or being involved in the entire technology development lifecycle, from conception of ideas, funding of conception ideas like Tom's group is at Stanford, all the way to loans being financed for large facilities and manufacturing facilities being deployed across the United States. So it's a very exciting time. Part of my role, again, is to sort of evangelize and make folks like yourselves aware of the opportunities, both at the labs and working with the labs, as well as these demonstrations and solicitations that are going out for that, and work with you on trying to sort of have mutual benefit and come to some sort of reality where we can get these technologies scaled to the public as fast as we can. So that's sort of what I'm about. I don't know if that's enough, but I guess we can hand it over to Wade and hear what he's all about.
That's terrific. And we'll come back to you, Matt, because I'm really interested if this is really doing things differently than you did them before at DOE, if it's a real paradigm change, which I gather it is. And then secondly, how we as entrepreneurs come to you, what that's all about. But Wade, if we could turn to you, and again, my apologies for screwing up your surname. I apologize.
My Persian last name is not easy to pronounce. So
all right. So if you would talk to us a little bit about plug and play and how you fit into the entrepreneur's ecosystem, because you're a very key part of
Terrific. Well, thank you for, of course, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Manu and Shri here. What we do at Plug and Play, in short, is we're a technology investor and a matchmaker. We invest, on the investment side of things, we invest in early stage companies out of a private single family office, deploying about $20 million a year into about 200 deals. So on average, we write about $100,000 checks into seed and seed stage companies. And because we invest in a lot of companies, we don't take board seats and we don't lead rounds. So we oftentimes find other investors to join the round and syndicate, and we help the startups to get to the next stage from there. On the other hand, we have, on the matchmaking side of things, we have a corporate innovation practice with about 550 large corporations across 20 different industries in 40 locations globally. I sit in our Silicon Valley headquarters. We, in each of these industry-specific verticals, in our vernacular we call them verticals, these are groupings of large corporations that are sectored off and they're seeking technology needs in a startup ecosystem. And we, in a very systemic way, we find technologies that can address their business challenges by pairing them up with startups that can solve their challenges. So in the energy and sustainability practice, which I founded about 7 years ago, we're focusing on the energy industry value chain, mainly working with oil and gas companies and electric utilities and construction companies and hard-to-abate sectors that are looking for decarbonization and electrification solutions. But then that's one of many other industry-specific focus areas. So as you can imagine, today sustainability cuts across almost every sector. We have a large automotive practice where some of the biggest automakers and manufacturers, OEMs and suppliers are looking for technologies that can help them better understand their supply chain and optimize it and better manage their inventory, better sell to their customers, build new EVs, build the new EV charging infrastructures, and so on and so forth. Then you have the built environment, some of the large real estate companies and construction and financiers and developers that are looking to better understand how to reduce their energy footprint in their large commercial and industrial buildings, or make it greener and safer and better for their tenants. Obviously, you have the industrials and manufacturing, which is a $65 trillion sector where some of these large manufacturers and OEMs and cement companies and steel manufacturers want to find ways to produce their materials in a greener and better and safer way. And that's a lot of interesting areas that cross-pollinate between these different areas. There are a number of airports and airlines that are looking for new ways to reduce their carbon footprint. So all of that to say that when it comes to introducing startups to large corporations, we take a pretty agnostic approach. We try to find ways that can get these startups to market in the fastest way. And we do this completely free and no equity required for the startups that come to Plug and Play. And that enables Plug and Play to attract both early stage companies, which we can invest in, as well as later stage companies like 12 that Tom presented earlier that have already raised a lot of capital, but they want to enter India or China or Middle East or Europe or Latin America, these markets where we have boots on the ground, and they want to enter them in a much more expedient way for all parties involved. So we hope that along the way, as we collect feedback from these actual demand owners and aggregate them, we find investable opportunities. So in a way, we conduct our last mile due diligence by putting these startups in front of their potential clients and see how they react, and we identify where the signals are, and we invest our own capital into those startups.
What's your average check size to an entrepreneur?
It's around $100,000, so very small check sizes. And 2021, because of the market demand, it actually grew to about 150. But then in 2022, we saw market correction. It went down to about 97. And I think this year we're going to exceed about 100K on average with more than 200 deals. We're en route to make more than 200 deals.
I'd like to come back to you and really hear what you see in terms of trends in ideas, in the idea deal flow that is coming to you, but also the couple of case studies that really bring to home what Plug and Play does, both one with Suzuki and then one with the New Zealand energy company.
Terrific.
Good.
Of course.
We'll come back to that. But Vipul, you might talk a little bit about what Suzuki is actually doing in India with new technologies, what your plan is to roll out, I guess, for the marketplace, vehicles that are at all three levels, leading up ultimately to total EV. But you can explain it better than I can. So please, go ahead.
Right. So, yesterday someone asked me, why is Japanese automakers not that aggressive in EVs? And the answer I gave him was because we are just so confused. I mean, there's so much of information that comes in from all part of the world, from Europe, from US, and of course Japan itself, and then the Indian subcontinent. So what mandate which we had at Suzuki Innovation Center is are we missing something? Go find out and try to find new ideas which is need not related to a car company, but can help in terms of sustainability and carbon neutrality in general. So we are just like 1-year-old initiative. We're still figuring it out, and so we talked to a lot of universities, startups in India and around India, and of course we do a lot of idea scouting to figure out how. What is there any missing puzzle right now, at least for countries like India? Because if we talk about EVs, and as I said, 90% of electricity in India is still non-renewable. So just having an EV on the place, but the carbon footprint, the whole supply chain of not just electricity, but also the car itself has a huge carbon footprint. So is EV the best way to go for it, right? So we're still confused. And of course, we are rolling out EVs, but we don't think that's the only way to handle the carbon neutrality. So, as I said, we are also trying to work out on maybe hydrogen could be alternate fuel, or there could be biogases or the CNGs, which is very popular in India right now. That could be other solutions. So this, just to come back to your question, so the idea is, the real answer is we don't know how the roadmap of EVs should look like, at least in countries like India or Southeast Asia or African countries. That is where the forte of Suzuki is. But we do know that there's still a lot of missing puzzles, and we need to keep trying out new ideas, scout for new ideas on how to balance that off with the current situation.
If I might just push back a little bit, and I'm reflecting now on what Arvind and Poe were talking about in terms of sustainability is kind of an offshoot of what new technology implementation is all about. It's one thing to talk about reducing the carbon footprint, and that's all well and good. But at the end of the day, or the beginning of the day, depending on your perspective, it's really about being competitive in a market that is really looking to be competitive, particularly with EVs. I mean, what Tata is doing in India and what Mahindra is doing in India in terms of anticipating a rollout of a cheap electrical vehicle is a major competitive point, I would guess. Is that a fair statement, or do you have a different way of presenting it?
I mean, see, we have, 50% of market share in India, right? So when and if we come, I mean, that will be competitive enough because of the leverage we have already in the market. And it's just not about EVs, right? It's also about the infrastructure. I mean, how many electric chargers do you have in Indian roads or African roads or, Indonesian roads? That's the question we need to answer, right? And because at the end of the day, what's the goal? The goal is to reduce carbon footprint on this planet, right? Just rolling out EVs probably may not be the best answer, and that comes back to the same point. So what are we missing? Let's actually clear out because of course EVs is definitely one of the solution, and we are on the path of it. But not because Tatas or other competitors are rolling out, we have to push faster. I don't think that's the right way to go for it. Yeah.
Fair enough. Good enough. Matt, so on that notion of competitiveness, I mean, the IRA is really positioning DOE to accomplish really great things in terms of where we get with our carbon footprint. I mean, one thing I read was the IRA could be the equivalent of an 80% reduction in America's footprint and could get us to those goals, 2030, 2050 goals that the Biden administration has put out there. But at the end of the day, is it about U.S. competitiveness vis-a-vis other competitors globally? And I'm thinking here about China in particular, but we don't have to get into the geopolitics of it, but I'm just wondering the purpose of it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So when the expectation, I guess, when there is funding at this level that we're talking about from the DOE is that since it's coming from Congress, that there will be some benefit domestically in the United States and make the United States more competitive globally in the technologies that they fund, as well as provide a level of economic security for the United States. I think as we've all seen during COVID, the supply chain crisis that hit this country in the many sectors, there's a big fear that going forward, as we slowly move to this new era of clean energy, that if we don't create a supply chain domestically, there's going to be major issues going forward. So part of the idea, I think, with the IRA is to sort of create that, economic security, U.S. competitiveness globally, and also through demonstration of clean energy technologies to be able to create markets in the United States. If you're able to create a situation where you're demonstrating at a large scale clean energy technologies and basically have a set of blueprints and can hand it to a company and say, here, you can go make this, the thought there is that through the IRA, they're able to do that. So I think, yeah, there's that. And also, because, especially in my realm in the national labs, where we're thinking a lot about entrepreneurship and how to get ideas out. I think part of the IRA too for the Department of Energy labs is to increase entrepreneurship at the national labs and how to engage with folks like yourselves. So the secretary has essentially said that every single national lab will have an entrepreneurship program, will have an entrepreneurial leave program going forward. That's going to be implemented over the next 2 years. And so that's going to be a game changer from my side, where we're actually able to facilitate and engage on a much more healthier basis, I think, with the investment community on getting technologies out of the labs.
Take just a minute, Matt, and explain those, because we're talking about competitiveness for the U.S., but we're talking about competitiveness for entrepreneurs as well. So
exactly.
Explain a little bit how they work with you and vice versa.
Sure. So there's a number of ways that the labs and the DOE engages with entrepreneurs. Everything from problem solving. So the labs have some of these facilities that Tom mentioned in his talk about light sources and such, that we're able to help solve problems that entrepreneurs have and leverage DOE funding to help them do that in ways that they wouldn't normally be able to do on their own, and help them solve problems with, I've got a material I'm trying to make and we're just running into some problems. We have people here that can help you with that, and the government will pay for their time to do it, and have a facility that's paid for by the taxpayers that you can then engage with. So that's huge. There's tools that can help people get over barriers to getting technology deployed. Also, I think there are tons of entrepreneurs that have probably heard of Cyclotron Road at Berkeley Lab. There's a lot of accelerators that have been started at many of the national labs, and just heard about the Sustainability School at Stanford as well. The national labs are starting to proliferate those. We're at about 5 right now. I believe there's one at Oak Ridge, NREL, Argonne. There's one being stood up in the Los Alamos area in New Mexico, and there's obviously the one at Berkeley. So they're starting to have funding out there so that small business-minded tech individuals that have a great idea that need national labs help and want to sit on site for 2 years, get paid to do it, and come up with an idea that's fully fleshed out with a product so that they can go to the investor community. That's another way we're helping entrepreneurs be more competitive.
Terrific. And I guess you'll share your contact information at the close of our panel. Wade, we might turn to you. And I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of the ideas that are coming to your doorstep, entrepreneurs with ideas, with businesses with companies that want your help. Are you seeing examples of what we've been talking about earlier on this stage, and that is chemistry-driven, biology-driven innovation solutions to carbon footprint? Or are we still in the software world, so to speak. What are the trend lines from your perspective?
I think the level of interest, engagement, and the government support when it comes to the new trends of hardware innovation has never been better than now. And hardware and capital-intensive technologies that produce molecules and transport them and utilize them in new ways. I think this has definitely been the best time I've seen in the past 7 years. We have made a few bets in the carbon space. We're pretty bullish about the direct air carbon capture area. Invested in a company called Heirloom that captures carbon directly from air and through mineralization and transfers it into useful products. And we've been able to facilitate introductions with some large corporations that can help demonstrate this technology on a commercial pilot scale. And once they get to that point, obviously that's where we'll see some of the government support here. I mean, $20 billion, it's incredible. I think the next few years, not only we're going to see the existing technologies from a completely refreshed lens, but also a whole new crop of startups that are going to emerge. And hopefully we can help them and identify the best ones to invest in early stage and then pass them along to large corporations and to government entities to bring them up to scale. We're also bullish about the point source carbon capture. We invest in technologies that capture carbon directly from the source of emission from ships or from the buildings. Obviously, this is top of mind, as Matt mentioned, the whole carbon economy. About a third of I mentioned about 500 large corporations. More than a third of them have made commitment to net carbon zero, and they all need help in carbon accounting, understanding where their emissions come from, carbon reduction. They want to invest in offsets, how to remove and how to reduce carbon emissions. They really need help in the carbon economy. And we've invested in a company that helps verify the carbon credits in the voluntary carbon markets, a company called Silvera, that is now helping the companies who want to offset carbon in the mangroves of Colombia. They can tell them how legitimate these projects are and help them put their money where the real projects are taking place. Or we've invested in companies that can use blockchain to build smart contracts for the procurement of hard to abate sectors like oil and gas. Like, how do we optimize some of these processes? How do we create traceability in the supply chain from where the raw materials are all the way when they're put into the industry? That company called Data Gumbo is now doing really well, based in Houston. And we've done the same investment in automotive industry, a company like Circular that does exactly the same thing. It helps the companies like Suzuki understand what's the carbon footprint of a part that they put in the car from the mining all the way to in the car, which is really incredibly critical for the Scope 2 carbon emissions and carbon monitoring. So there's a whole area of technologies. We haven't made a bet in the hydrogen space ourselves. We have built some amazing hydrogen hubs around the world in partnership with the cities and governments and mainly with the corporations. And we are shepherding startups into their selection mechanisms and help them accelerate the adoption of these technologies, like in Hamburg or Port of Antwerp or Port of Savannah. So we have built all these hubs in 40 locations around the world, and we are keeping our ears on the ground for the best companies that emerge. And we help with the help of the government entities, with the national labs, with the cities, and mainly with the corporations. We kind of nudge the startups a little bit to their next stage.
So if I'm a startup, if I'm an entrepreneur with a startup, what kind of obstacles do I have, or what kind of criteria do I have to consider when I come to you? Do I have to bring best in class? Do I have to bring margins greater than 10% or the promise thereof? What do I need to bring to get you to let me in the door?
Great. Thanks for that question. There are two key considerations that we have.
What do you require, or what do you take in return as for the service?
Of course. Yeah, so two key considerations when it comes to working with Plug and Play from a startup point of view. Number one is whether they like Plug and Play to be an investor. That's usually in the earlier side of things when they're like a few founders and they just have built their minimum viable product. They have done their family and friends round, and they've gone through from 0 to 1. And now they want to hit the ground running with large corporations. Looks like we're running out of time, but with corporates, if they want to accelerate that process, they have to be past that stage. That's when we consider them for our own investment. However, when it comes to directly working with these large corporations, even if they're past plug-and-play investment window, which is that seed and pre-seed stage, they can still come to us and without giving away equity or without paying any fees, work with some of our corporate clients in the markets that they're interested in. Usually we have like a very cookie cutter angel type mechanism to filter through the startups and hash out the noise, like where they're founded and how much money they raised, what their addressable target market is, what's their differentiating factor, and whether or not they have a technology that stands out and no one else can build. And then once they're past that stage, then they're in the good hands of plug-and-play corporate clients from there on.
I went online and read some of the case studies that of companies that Plug and Play has handled, and it's impressive. And there are two that sort of stood out, and I don't think we've got time to go into, but one involves Suzuki and SOAR Robotics, and to me was an interesting case study because it really demonstrated the importance of being able to scale and being able to scale in a marketplace with that capacity to allow scale. And then there's another one well worth looking at called Sapient and Simple Energy, Contact Energy, the New Zealand energy arm. That's also an interesting one. But I'm afraid we're close to being finished, and I might ask, can we take a question or two if there is questions, or?
Yes, we have time for some Q&A.
All right, let's go ahead, and I hope our panelists will agree to stay a little bit after and answer questions. Okay.
So my question is actually both to the panel here and to the professor here, just in case he wants to step in too, because he talked about process heat, pressure and temperature. So I'm curious, are you looking into concentrated solar power or fusion as a source of heat and pressure and temperature? So whoever wants to answer it.
I promise that wasn't a planned question. I know I'm at Lawrence Livermore, but yeah, there obviously in the media, probably last December, there was a big event that showed up. We were the first lab in the world to replicate the fusion that goes on in the sun in a controlled fashion at the National Ignition Facility, and so it was very exciting. So now we're at the point where it's very interesting, actually. So now we're at a point where we've proven the science to a certain degree. We've had a number of different experiments that have evolved since then. And the idea is that going forward, we're going to bring in engineers to figure out the component level ways to scale this and take it to market. And so it's going to be exciting over the next 10 years. There's been a ton of funding, both on the investor side and the DOE, who's actually put in a few $100 million on this as well, both in ARPA-E and the Office of Fusion Energy. Very exciting time. Concentrated solar, my friends at Sandia National Lab have the solar tower. I don't know if any of you have seen that online, but it's something they built in the 1980s and 90s where they have this array of reflectors that basically take the sun out in the desert, point it to a sort of area, and then concentrate thermal energy from solar into one area. They're going to start building a second version of that over the next 2 years. We've seen plants like that out in Nevada. There's a lot of them in the West, obviously, but a lot of activity going on in that right now, and there's going to be large-scale demonstrations going forward in the years to come.
Okay, all right, so please.
Thank you very much. Prakash Ramchandran from Emerging Open Tech Foundation.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Prakash Ramchandran from Emerging Open Tech Foundation. You're talking about high risk and high reward technologies, quantum being one of them. I want to know that what would you do, especially collaboratively with India, because we are a tie here. So how would you look at it as an option for emerging next 20 years or decades for quantum computing as the base like silicon?
Well, on the quantum side, it's a little tricky. I was the technology integration manager for QNext, which is one of the five quantum research science centers across the country on behalf of SLAC when I was there. Quantum is considered one of these technologies that's very sensitive and controlled by the federal government. They've sort of designated that. So it's and it's in very much its infancy, in my opinion. It also requires a large number of disciplines, both materials, the algorithm, the math, processing, manufacturing. There's a whole host of things and individual components that I think are going to require a large effort around the world to sort of achieve. But right now, I feel like in this age where we're at now, I feel like it's not. I don't know if it's really ready for prime time to have intergovernment collaborations. I know some of our allies. There's been some agreements on that through specific countries, but I can't really answer as far as India goes. I really can't answer. So.
Hello there. Thank
Maybe
you
we
so
could
much.
take a couple of questions at the same time, and that way we can get everybody's questions in. We've got two people standing. Can you both ask your questions?
I wasn't sure. Oh, thank you so much for answering and giving us your time. Also, Manu, this is one of the best sessions, I think, in Thai, so thank you for this. Really enjoyed the programming. So I'm not in climate as a professional. I'm just a consumer, so I want to ask you a very simple consumer question and want to see what you all's thoughts are in terms of trends and how people are thinking of solving this. When I go to the grocery store, I'm not allowed to use a plastic bag, which is great, but everything else is plastic, from vegetables to meat to candy. I just don't know how we're thinking about that. These are simple things. I know we're trying to solve big things, but why can't we just solve something small like that?
Hi, thanks for a very informative session, and thanks for sharing your perspectives. We actually have been working with the national labs, some of the national labs, because we provide smart grid software and controls for that. So we're already kind of going through the DOE funding process. So I would be very interested in learning more about how
Could you hold the microphone right?
Yeah, sorry. How we could participate in the demos that you're talking about.
Oh, sure. So there's been calls put out over the last 2 years by the office to participate. So a lot of them are at large scale and require 50% cost match, which is a typical thing for the feds if they're doing some sort of demonstration or deployment type project. So I know there are teams that are being put together, and it's just a matter of connecting with folks that are on these teams to be a part of that. Now, one other thing that's popular that doesn't require going through these large demonstrations, one thing to consider is working with a national lab to work at their lab to do something on a small scale at the lab. The great thing that Professor Yaramino talked about is that Stanford had a situation where they can do things at the lab on the small scale and then go over to the national lab and do things on a bigger scale. So I would encourage you in certain areas, if you want to demonstrate something, it may not be the size of a major metropolitan area, but it could be something on the size of a building if you want to demonstrate it that. The national labs are a great place to start. And there's plenty of folks, especially in the grid area that you're talking about, that are working on those types of things and actually have demonstration facilities on site where you can just plug things in and see how they work.
So Wade or Vipul, do you want to address the plastics issue? Is there any businesses companies that are coming your way that are addressing that? And Vipul, any ideas along those lines too?
I'll just maybe add a few points about what we do at Plug and Play to help address our global plastic issues. About 2.5 years ago, we formed a joint venture with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which is a consortium of about 56 of the largest petrochemicals, CPGs, and chemical companies that pledged to put an end to plastic waste, putting about $100 million each. And they hired Plug and Play to run their open innovation platform globally in 9 locations, from Johannesburg to Silicon Valley to Singapore to China to Abu Dhabi and Japan and a few other places. And what we've been able to do over these past 2.5 years is we identified technologies that can reduce our plastic waste by upcycling, recycling, alternative materials, and a whole plethora of technologies, and been able to demonstrate about 100 projects cumulatively with all the corporate participants in the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And it's one of the many efforts that are being done out there, but I'm pretty bullish about the technologies today that maybe we've been overlooked 5-6 years ago, but with the commitment of the corporations in the like of these consortiums that I mentioned, like Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and we've been very lucky to be part of that journey, and I think there's going to be more of those. Your question was a little bit more consumer-centric, which I completely understand. There's a lot of challenges, but I think it's going to be one of many challenges that need to be solved in the plastic value chain.
And Vipul, do you want to take the last word?
Yeah, so packaging is a huge challenge in our industry because every part of a car or a bike has to be packaged well. Otherwise, the scratch is an issue. And so one of the examples I gave, so we are working on 2 of the projects. One is we identified that a banana fiber, as I was talking about, can be used as a packaging material alternate to the plastics. So that is one thing we are working on. Second, in Africa, what we are working on is, so there's a lot of these lots of tailor shops that has waste clothes when they cut out and that waste clothes, a lot of small villages, they are, stitching it up and making bags and, packaging materials out of it. And we are trying to help them scale up so that we can use those materials for wherever we can to help. Instead of plastic, we use those clothes to sort of package. So reuse of that clothes, So these are the 2 projects which I can share, yeah.
So thank you very, very much to the panelists, all 3 of you. I have one more question. Well,
if we're
we'll take it, if it's okay,
All right.
Manu. Yeah, all
One
right.
more, and maybe this might
Please.
help wrap up some good closing comments. So not to make it controversial, but maybe what I have in mind is Oxen Solar. The lawsuit they brought and kind of slowed down the solar industry, but maybe to make it more of a real question that I think would benefit. TiE is entrepreneurs, it's international. Climate change is a global problem, and yet there is this component of nationalism. You mentioned quantum science is, there's a protectionism around it. Maybe just your thoughts as people think of investing in companies. Obviously, Oxen Solar, this is a much more mature industry, but where your thoughts lie on that element of not just the technology, but how the governments, may decide what is a good investment or not, how that could impact companies.
That's a fair question. There's a lot of layers to that, so I'll do my best to sort of explain it. There's federal law, at least in the United States, and then you have sort of, what we hear from Congress. There's federal law, at least how the national labs are governed, called the Bayh-Dole Act, which says that, if there's $1 federal dollar that's gone into the universities or small business or something, that they'll get title to that, but the U.S. government will get a non-exclusive license to practice that worldwide as well. So that's the tricky part when you're accepting federal funds. It's not just free. Okay, if you're going to accept federal funds to demonstrate, to scale, and it's what's made a lot of the ecosystem of technology development in the United States successful has been doing that. It's not a free ride. There's always going to be a hook on it. To address your point about the nationalism side, I can't really address that. I'm a scientist. I help facilitate all of this. But what I can say is that it's encouraged to leverage the funding that comes to these startups and everything to develop technology from the federal government to have a place in the United States to call home, to manufacture and to create jobs. That's the whole intent behind it. So I don't, beyond that, I can't really comment too much because it's not my place, but I know that the intent is more about building up the United States as in this technology base and the jobs, and I can't really comment on the rest of that really.
So fair question and fair answer. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.